Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Nazir Daf Chav Daled, Nazir 34, and we're going to be moving right along with our tractate Nazir. But today's Daf Yomi is a little bit of Kodshim. We get into the sacrificial offerings. So the Daf Yomi tells us on the top of Chav Daled Amud Aleph, Yisha Shenadra B'Nazir. Let's say there was a woman who took a vow to be a Nazirite, V'Hifri Shah Es Behemta, and she separated her animal, so she separated her animal. What do you mean she separated her animal? Tosfos explains that there are three animals that the Nazir brings, as part of her what's called her carbon tahora, that if she had become Tameya, then she would bring three animals for carbon tumah, which we've discussed a lot in our tractate. That's the oah, the chatas, and the asham. But let's say she completes her status of naziris in a state of tahara, then she brings what's called the carbon tahor. And this is the three animals are female sheep for a chatas, a male sheep for an olah, and an ayil, a ram, for a shlomim. So let's say this woman who took a vow to be a Nazirite, and she separated her animals. But then, as we've been learning throughout this tractate, and also mainly Maseches Nedarim, then her husband hears about the vow, and Hefer Labala, he rejects her vow on the day he hears it. Im So if the animal was his, then the animal is chulin. The animal goes out and can graze in the flock. And as the Gemara will explain, she had no right to designate his animals. So she did nothing. You can't just take my animal and say it's hektish. But let's say the animals were hers, and the Gemara is going to ask, well, where does she get the money for it? Hachatas tamos, then the chatas is going to die. Why? Why will chatas die? Because since the chatas has to have a very, very strong relationship with its owner. So therefore, when she separated, it was a chatas of a nazir, but now she's no longer a chatas, she's no longer a nazir anymore, but the chatas still has that status of being designated for a nazir. And so, but she can't bring a chatas as a voluntary offering. So if she was im shalai sabahima, so then under those circumstances, we're going to say the chatas will die because she can't bring it as an offering. This will become one of the five. There are five chatos that we put them in a room and we basically starve them to death, that they don't get any food. And this is one of them because the chatas cannot be brought on the altar as a voluntary offering. Va'olah, and what about the animal that she separated as an olah? Well, that can be brought as a voluntary offering. That's tikra va'olah. The olah will be brought as an olah, and the shlamim and the carbon shlamim that can also be brought as a voluntary offering. That's a shlamim. But the shlamim, unlike generally speaking, a shlamim is brought for 2 days and 1 night. But the shlamim of a nazir is brought for 1 day and 1 night, just like the carbon toda is also brought for 1 day or 1 night. So therefore, we see from here, by the way, the Netziv says, why is the carbon toda brought for 1 day and 1 night? And the Netziv says, because you want the person who brings a Thanksgiving offering to be able to, you don't want him to save it for, like put it in a Ziploc bag and save it in the freezer. You want him to invite all his friends to share with it. So maybe we could say the same thing about a Nazirite. Nazirite has to eat it right away. And so therefore, this Nazirite who had been removed from society, he had been separated from society, can't come in contact with his dad, he's not going to parties, not drinking wine, he's not cutting his hair. As part of his re-entry program, he has to have a feast where he invites his friends and they eat from this feast. But however, he's not going to bring bread with it. So it does not have the bread with it. So why does it not have bread with it? Typically speaking, the Nazir has to bring bread with his shlamim, and it's as it says in the verse that he brings a basket of bread. But in this sal matzos, soas, chalos, bulos, bashem, and a basket of matzos, flour that is mixed with oil, and rikiki matzos meshuchim b'shamim. He has been chalos, matzos, and rikikim. But in this case, he's not going to bring the bread offerings. And Tosfos explains the reason is because it says that you're supposed to place the bread al kapei Nazir on the hands of the Nazir. But since she's no longer a Nazirite, there's no kapei Nazir. There's no hands of the Nazirite, and so therefore she does the Kohen. She does not bring the bread. So ve'enan tu'unin lachem. It does not. You bring the shlomim, but you don't bring the bread associated with it. Hayu amau sesumin. Let's say they have money that was sesumin. What's the money that's sesumin? Meaning to say she took money and she designated it for these sacrificial offerings, but she doesn't designate money going for a specific one of these offerings, just money that she had set aside. Then yipul in a dava. Then that money will go and be brought for the voluntary offerings. Maas mufurash, and let's say she designates some of the money for the olah, some for the chatas, some for the shlamim. Well, then the mei chatas, the money for the chatas, again, a chatas cannot be brought in without it being a strong connection to the person who committed the act. And in this case, she's no longer in the zira, so you can't bring the chatas voluntarily. So chatas yachul yamamelch, the chatas gets tossed into the sea, basically. In the equivalent of a chatas tamus, equivalent of the chatas that it's dying. Basically, you can't get any benefit from it. You throw it into the sea. Well, then you're not allowed to benefit from it. But biblically speaking, there's no me'ila on it. There's no trespassing. Me'ila is a din in kachim, and this is you're only not allowed to benefit from this rabbinically, Tosfos says. And so therefore, we're going to say. So therefore, since the mos is prohibited rabbinically, and Lamolim, because the Tosfos explains, since it's going into the Yam HaMelech, we're not calling it Kadshei Hashem. And so the prohibition of Shlomim is only on, the prohibition of Me'ila is only on Kadshei Hashem. And so therefore, that's why there's no Me'ila, Me'ila is a misappropriation of temple funds, and that's a special halacha where if you do it accidentally, you have to bring a korban Hashem Me'ila, and also you have to pay back plus a fifth. That law doesn't apply here. And the Dmei Shlamim, what do you do with the money of the Shlamim? You bring a korban Shlamim, yom echad. You bring it for one day only, and you don't bring bread with it. So it says the Gemara Mantana. So we say that if she had taken the sacrificial animal without her husband's permission, and then he annulled her vow, then the sacrificial animal goes to become a chulin. It's no longer going to be considered sacred. So that means to say she took it without permission, that her husband wasn't required to give it to her. That means her husband was not meshubed. He didn't have a lien on his property to give her a korban. So Mantana Deba'ala Mishtabila, who is the author who says that the husband is not meshubed to his wife, so to give her the korban. Amar Rav Chisda, this is the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say he doesn't have to pay for her korbanos. These Sakadaitach Rabbi Yehuda. If you want to say it's the position of Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to see in a moment the Braisa, which records the positions of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. If you want to say it's Rabbi Yehuda, why do we say that the animal is chulin? Rabbi Yehuda would say that the animal is hektish because he says hamishtabila. He says he's meshubet to her. Tanya to pay for her karbanos. Tanya, what does the Braisa say? Rabbi Yehuda says Adam maybe karban ashir al ishto. A person brings a karban ashir for his wife. The person brings a karban ashir for his wife. Meaning to say, what is this discussing? It's discussing the following case, that if, let's say, a woman is mechuyeves to bring a korban, and let's say she is a mitzora or yoledes, then under those circumstances, her korban is variable, depending on how much money she has. So if she's wealthy, she brings an animal. If she's poor, she brings a bird. If she's dal shabadal, if she's very, very poor, she brings a grain offering. So in this case, we're going to say, let's say the husband wants to say, listen, she has no money. I'm wealthy, but she has no money. So therefore, I want to bring for her the grain offering. So Rabbi Yehuda's in the position, no, the husband has to bring the korban asher. He has to bring the expensive one. He can't say, well, even though I have money, I'm not her. Adam maybe korban asher al ishto. He brings the sacrifice for a wealthy person for his wife. And also every sacrifice that she's obligated to bring, basically her finances are tied to him, and if he's wealthy, he has to bring the wealthy carbon for her. Shekach kosev, because this is what he writes during the ksuba, koach rayos islach alai min kadamas dina. Any basically responsibilities that you have from before, and since this is an obligation, since she has to bring a sacrifice, that's a pre-existing condition. It's a pre-existing sacrifice that she has to bring. And so, therefore, we see from here that Rabbi Yehuda would say that he's meshubah to bring her karbanos. And since he's meshubah to bring her karbanos, therefore, he would have to bring the karban ashir. So if that's the case also in this case, why don't we say the husband's meshubah, and therefore she has the right to those animals, and therefore those animals are hektish? So Rava says, no, afilu tema Rabbi Yehuda, you could even say that this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, even though he says that you have achrayus, here in this case, that he would say the husband doesn't have achrayus to pay for her karbanos. Why? When do we say that Rabbi Yehuda says that the husband is meshubad to her to pay for her karbanos? Only b'milsa detzrichela, something that was necessary. B'milsa detzrichela, something that was necessary, that she needed to do, that she needed to pay. That she needed, but milsa delo tzrichela, but something that she didn't need. Then he's not meshubah to pay her, and so therefore, since he annulled her vow, she didn't need to bring these karbonos. She had no responsibility to bring these karbonos because the vow was annulled, and so that's how the Mefarish explains it. Since he annulled her vow, he's not meshubah to her, and so therefore. So therefore, the animal is not consecrated, and so therefore it's chulin, and so therefore it'll go out and graze in the field. This is milsa de lo tzricha, and so therefore, since she didn't need it, so therefore, under these circumstances, we're going to say the husband was not meshubah to bring her karbanos, and the Gemara says, so that's the first approach. The first approach of Rav Chisda is that. This is, you could even say, he tried to say that this was the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Yehuda, and then the Gemara says, no, you could even say it's Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara then says an Iker da Amri, alternative version of this discussion is, Man Tana, who is the author of our Mishnah, says Rav Chisda, it's Rabbi Yehuda, that the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Why? V'chi meshabela b'milsa detzricho. He say just like we said at the end, the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, who says in general the husband is meshubah, but in this case he's not meshubah. Why? Because when is he meshubah? Only b'milsa detzricha, only on something that was necessary, that she needed. But b'milsa de lo tzricha, but something that was not meshubah, something that she didn't need, we're going to say she's not meshubah. Something that was not needed, that she didn't need to bring this carbon, like in this case, because her vow was annulled, then he was not meshubah, and so therefore. We would say, even Rabbi Yehuda would say the karbanos are not hektish. Di Rabbanon, because if you want to say it's the Rabbanon, lo meshabed la klal, according to the Rabbanon. So according to the Rabbanon, if you want to say this, if you want to say that this is the position, if you want to say our Mishnah is according to the Rabbanon are the position the lo meshabed la klal, the Rabbanon are the position that the husband is not meshubah to his wife at all, and so therefore. Then we wouldn't have to say that the husband rejected her vow, and then we're going to say that the animal goes to chulin. And then even if the husband didn't reject her vow, the animal would be chulin because she would have no right to take it. So how could we say? So how can we say that the Mishnah is talking about that is meshubah? Only could go in the akni way. Only in a case where the husband actually gave it to her. Keeping the akni way, and since he actually gave it to her. It would be hers, and then the animal wouldn't go to chulin, and so therefore we have to say, according to this alternative approach, that the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says in general he's meshubah, but in this case he's not meshubah, because according to the Rabbanon, even if he didn't annul the vow, then the animal would be chulin as well. So that's the way Rav Chisda, the two possible ways in which Rav Chisda can explain our Gemara. Now we're on the top of Chavdalad Amud Aleph. Rav Amar Afila Tema Rabbanon. Rava says, no, you could even say that our Mishnah is like the Rabbanon, Kimakni law, that you could say that he gave her the animal. And so therefore, well, if he gave her the animal, why is it chulin? Because when he gave it to her, Nami, b'milsa detzricha, he only gave it to her in something that she needed. But in this case, since he was made for it, it was milsa de lo tzricha. And so therefore, we'll maknilan. So therefore, he didn't actually give it to her. He gave it to her on the condition that she needed it. But since he annulled her vow, she didn't need it. And so therefore, we're going to say that even according to the Rabbanan, the animals in this case are going to chulin and they're not hektish. So now we say the next line. It says im shalah. But if it was her animal, then if it's a chatas, it will die v'ola. And if it's an ola, it's tikar. If it's brought as an ola. Gemara asks the fundamental question: where does the wife get the money to bring her own animals? Where does she get her own animals from? How does she get it? To Amris, don't you know that we say we're going to say this in God willing in Gittin, which are almost upon. Then it's going to say Masha Kanta Isha Kanaval, whatever she buys, her husband owns. So if that's the case, Masha Kanta Isha Kanavala. So if that's the case, how does she have her own animals? So Amra Papa. First answer is from Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, Shekimatzda meisasa. That the husband gave her money for the purpose of food. And this is kitchen money that she saved. She was frugal. She saved the kitchen money. And so therefore, since she saved the kitchen money, we're going to say that under those circumstances, she had a little bit of extra money, which he gave to her, and she used that for her animals. By the same alternatively, the iknila achar, that somebody else gave her the money, and he said to her, he said, I'm giving this to you on the condition that your husband doesn't have authority over it. So therefore, her husband was specifically excluded from the money. So now we come up to the next point. That if she separated an ola, it's brought as an ola. If she separated shlomim, it's brought as a shlomim. So Amalei Shmuel Avua. So Shmuel says to Avua Bar'i. Shmuel comes along and he says to an Amora whose name is Avua Bar'i. Lo teisiv al karech. Don't sit down. Ad until you explain this matter to me. Now, he doesn't explain to us what matter he was talking about, but it's very clear from the context of the Gemara that what we're talking about. We're talking about the case of, give me an example of 4 rams, the rams of the shlomim that the Nazir brings, which don't require bread to be brought with them. Generally speaking, the Nazir is supposed to bring the bread, the sal matzos, the chalos that are bluos b'shem, and the rakikei matzos meshucham b'shemen. But in this case, tell me 4 cases where you don't bring bread with the carbon of the Nazir, of the shlomim. He says, ve'eluhein arba elim. So I want you to explain to me this matter. These are the 4 rams. She'enan. So Avu Bar'i responds that I'll explain to you. There are 4 rams. She'enan tu'unin lechem. There are 4 rams of the shlomim that don't require the bread brought along with it. What are these 4 rams? Shelo v'shelah. His ram, her ram. Shelah achar misa, shelah achar kapara. The ram that's brought after the death of the Nazirite and after kapara was already offered, after the animal was already offered as a sacrifice. So now we're going to go through these 4 cases. So the Gemara is going to explain what Avua Bar'i taught. What are these cases? Shelah Hada Amran. What's her ram? That's in a case where she separated the ram and then her husband annulled the vow. So then you bring the shlomim without the bread. That's what we just talked about. Shelah, what's his case? The Tanan, Haish Nadir Espino Benazir. A man has the right. We're going to get to this, God willing, next week. Rosh Chodesh Adar. We're going to come to this daf. Erev Rosh Chodesh Adar. Monday morning, we're going to come to this daf Chav Ches. That we're going to say that our father has the right to make his son a Nazirite. But a woman cannot make her son a Nazir. But let's say after the father makes the son a Nazir, the son takes a haircut, somebody gives him a haircut, he takes himself a haircut, or the relatives give him a haircut. Let's say he objects or the relatives object. Assuming, let's say, he had separated money to bring as a carbon shlamim for this Nazirite, he had separated money to bring carbonos for this Nazirite, yipu nedava. Then the money becomes nedava. But let's say it was most mefurashin let's say it was money specifically designated. Then if it's money for a chatas, yelchu yam hamelech. Then that sin offering money goes to the yam hamelech. It goes and is tossed into the sea. The me'ola, if it's the ola offering, yaviu ola. Then it's brought as an ola. And indeed, that you are considered trespassing on that ola offering, misappropriation, and here's where we get to the point of what we're discussing. If it's a shlamim, yaviu shlamim v'nechol yom echav ve'enatu unin lechem. So in this case, since he separated the money, but the child's no longer Nazir, you bring the shlamim, but you don't bring the bread because who are you going to place the basket on? So that's the case of shalo. His offering is when is his offering brought without bread. That's the case. So hers was where the husband annulled the vow. His is where the son rejects being a Nazir somehow, either through himself or through the relatives. What's the case of the next case that Avu Bari responded to Shmuel is the case of Achar Misa, after the death of the Nazarite. And how do we know after the death of the Nazarite the animal is brought, but there's no carbon, but there's no bread brought with it? The Tanya, Mafresh Mo's Nazira. So let's say somebody separated money for his Nazira. Then under those circumstances, if somebody separated money for his Nazirus, and then after, then he cannot benefit from them. And nevertheless, even though he separated the money, even though you're not allowed to benefit, there's no me'ilah. The reason why there's no me'ilah is because, technically speaking, since the money was not specified for a specific carbon, the owner could take all of that money and use it for shlamim. Let's say he found a nice big animal, and all the other karbanos he'll buy from other money, because he didn't say which is, if it's for ola or chatas. And by shlamim, it's not considered kache kachim, it's kache kalam, and it's a lesser kachim, so therefore there's no me'ilah. Mace, but let's say he died, v'hayulo ma'os asumin. So this Nazarite separated money, and then he died, yipul and a dava. Then the money becomes a voluntary offering. Ma'os mifurashin, and that becomes communal offering. Let's say the money had been specified. If it's a sin offering, it goes to the Yam HaMelech, it goes to the sea, and then you're not allowed to benefit from it. If it's an ola offering, you bring it as an ola. And that is considered misappropriation, because that is specifically a ola. And now in this case, you bring a shlamim, yaviu shlamim from the money that was separated for shlamim, and you eat it for one day, but you don't bring the bread. Again, where are you going to put the bread? On whose hands? And what's the fourth case of Avu Bari? That this is the case of Achar Kapara, that he achieved atonement for it. How so? Meaning to say he lost his shlamim and then he brought another one, and now he found the original shlamim. So then you bring it again as a shlamim, but you don't bring it with the bread basket. So the Gemara says, so what did we say here under these circumstances? So achar kapara svarahu. How do we know this? It's logical. Achar misa. And after the Nazarite dies, what's the reason why you don't bring the bread with it? My time kapara. What's the reason that after the Nazarite dies, you don't bring the bread with it? What's the reason? Because the Nazir is no longer raw. He's no longer able to get kapara because he's dead, and so therefore he can't fulfill the law of nasana kapea Nazir. So achar kapara nami lo chazil kapara. Well, after he achieved atonement, he's also not chazil kapara. He's also not able to get the kapara because under these circumstances, he's already achieved atonement. So therefore, it's logical that you don't bring the bread basket with it. So the Gemara asks the question: V'suek, are these the only four cases? Avu Bari's response to Shmuel, that Shmuel says, so these are the only four cases where you bring the shlamim without the bread. Va'ika, what about the case where it says in Menachos, it says, we learned in the Brisa, it says, Ushar kol shalmei nazir sheshachatan shalom k'mitzvasan kasherim. That we learned there in Mitzvahs Nazir that all the other Shalmei Nazir that you shechted not for the purpose of not with the right intent, you shechted them shalol lishma, you shechted them, for example, for a different carbon, then they're kosher, but they don't fulfill the obligation. And so therefore, this Nazir is not going to fulfill his obligation for Shalmei Nazir. So he's going to have to bring another ram. And these Shalmei Nedava, these shlamim are nechal yom echad. If you slaughtered this shlamim without the right intent, then you can only eat it for one day and one night. And even though we're going to say it's not like a Shalmei Nazir because it was shachted shelo lishma, nevertheless, since it was consecrated for the purpose of the Shalmei Nazir, we're going to say you have to adopt the stringencies of it. And so therefore, but nevertheless, even though you only eat it for one day and one night, you're not going to eat with it the bread. You're not going to bring the baskets of bread with it that, generally speaking, that were brought and waved, and velo zroa. And so also with these rams, you don't have the other din, which is by the Shalmei Nazir, that you need to take this roa, the forearm, and you cook it with the ram and wave it on the hands of the Nazir, because this Nazirus is not going to be finished with this shlamim. You're going to need to bring another shlamim. And so if that's the case, why does Avu Bar-E only list these four when there's this also the case, that the case of the Shalmei Nazir that was slaughtered initially, Shaloka Mitzvasan, it was slaughtered improperly. So the Gemara says, Kamitzvasan kachashiv, Shaloka Mitzvasan kachashiv. Avu Bar-E is counting those shlamim that were brought properly, but this is a case of an example of one that was not brought properly, and therefore he's not going to count it. Okay, we stop here. The daf yomi, a beautiful daf today, beautiful daf, and shkoyach. Of course, if anybody